Hey everyone. Hey. Thank y'all for coming. My name is Dean. But before we start the presentation and everything, I'd like to have a brief moment of silence for Oscar Montemayor, who recently passed away. He was a part of the OSU community for 20 years. He worked for the Diversity and Cultural Engagement Center here at OSU to help promote diversity and created a lot of safe spaces for marginalized people. He was a great mentor to many students, and his legacy at OSU will live on forever. So please join me in a moment of silence. Thank you. So thank y'all for coming. My name is Azim again. I'm a part of the student group Allied Students for Another Politics, or ASAP for short, and we're an organization that strives to make our campus and community more socially just. We have a sign-up sheet in the back for our listserv, and we also have a description for what our mission and what our group is in our Facebook to get updates on events and meeting times. And along with our two other co-sponsors, which are Corvallis Palestine Solidarity and the Anaris Project for Alternative Futures, we have the great pleasure of hosting journalists Abby Martin and Mike Preisner, which I should probably get the focus on that. Cool. Yeah, journalists Abby Martin and Mike Preisner. They both recently went to Palestine to do a segment for the show Empire Files, which is a web series on Telesur that focuses on how the U.S. empire shaped other parts of the world through its various wars, policies, and interventionism. And they agreed to share their experiences they witnessed firsthand and talk about how we as U.S. citizens are complicit in the ongoing atrocities in Palestine. Just a quick bio of them, and then I'll turn it over. Abby is the host, writer, and producer of the show Empire Files. She previously worked at RT, where she hosted Breaking the Set. It's a great show. They're still on YouTube. The clips are still on YouTube, and they're still relevant, and y'all should check them out. And she also founded the citizen journalism group Media Roots, and has a podcast by the same name that she co-hosts with her brother. It's also a great podcast. You should check it out. And finally, she's an extremely talented artist, and you can find some of her great paintings at abbymartin.org. Mike is a producer and writer for Empire Files also. He's also an anti-war activist that co-founded March Forward, which is an organization of active U.S. military members of the Iraq and Afghanistan war that encourages other active military personnel to resist deployment. He's also an organizer with the Answer Coalition, which is an anti-war and anti-racist organization. So before I completely turn it over to them, there's some snacks in the back and that type of stuff. So thank you, and welcome, Abby and Mike.
So you guys can hear us okay, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So hey, I'm Abby. This is Mike. As Azim just said, thanks for the introduction, Azim. So as you just mentioned, we do our files, and Palestine's been an issue very dear to our hearts for a very long time. So we jumped on the opportunity to go. A lot of Americans only go to Palestine for the so-called birthright tours, where they kind of go and see this fun-loving, peaceful community living under threat of genocide from Muslims, right? So we kind of went on the opposite tour, which was seeing the real occupied territories and live like and go through on a daily basis. And we stayed in some of the most attacked refugee camps. I didn't know before I went there that there are actually internally displaced refugees that are not just able to live in these camps. They're constantly attacked, and we'll get to that in a second. We visited the site of home demolitions. We talked to probably over 100 Palestinians going through different aspects of daily life. And we even traveled through Israeli territory. We went to an anti-refugee rally. Yes, there's anti-refugee rallies, very big ones also in the country. And we won't be able to get to everything here. We're going to try to get to a lot of the firsthand experiences, but we're going through it and putting together a series for Empire Files. And the show, what we like to do is try to provide the bigger picture, the full context of every situation that we cover, especially this one I think is extremely crucial because of the media and the of the whole situation. So we try to start off our series with explaining how Palestine actually was colonized, and kind of explaining the 4 series of maps, which Mike will get to in a second. And the next On the Ground series, the first part of the series was actually inside the refugee camps, giving you a sense of what it's like in these small, tiny camps. The third one that's coming out today is on the home demolitions, which just reached a 10-year high. So we'll talk about all of that.
Cool. And yeah, just by a show of hands, who's like new to this topic, who consider yourselves new to this topic and are coming kind of as a beginner to learn about? Okay, cool, that's great. Yeah, you know, like the issue of Palestine is something that seems like a very far away issue for people in the United States because, you know, unless we have friends from the region, it's something that we're not connected to in any direct way. But that we're really connected to it in a big way because a huge amount of our tax dollars go to it. Many of you may have seen that the newest U.S. aid package to Israel was the biggest ever, and it was always been very big, but it's at $38 billion now of U.S. tax dollars. The military occupation that we're going to be describing to you. And both mainstream presidential candidates, Clinton and Trump, to be an even bigger friend to Israel and pledge even more money. So we have, you know, that situation. And I even think that, I think Azim told me that your campus has a partnership with Sabra Hummus, one of the corporations that operates inside occupied territories. And so, you know, the money you spend at school plays a role in all of this too. You know, ironically, Sabra is named after a neighborhood where Palestinian refugees were massacred. Beyond it, you know, profiteering from the war. So yeah, so we hope to shed some light on why really, you know, I'm sure a lot of you are here who are familiar with this topic. So we wanted to be able to give a picture for people who are very new, an overview of what's going on. But for those people like me, you know, who have been interested in this topic for over a decade, really what was shocking to me and what I feel is important to report back to people who are politically active around this issue.
Right, so the ongoing occupation of Palestine simply would not happen without U.S. backing. So the sponsorship and support of the U.S. empire is really how this is able to happen. As Mike just said, $38 billion of our tax dollars. Meanwhile, Flint, people are still poisoned there with lead poisoning. The North Dakota pipeline is still going strong, but of course we have to give Israel an endless amount of money and support to carry out apartheid and illegal occupation. And I say illegal because it is illegal under international law. And once again, the U.S. is the one who keeps vetoing all these UN resolutions to try to hold Israel to some sort of accountability. So Palestine was, until I was 17 or 18 years old, as a freshman in college, I had no idea what it was. All I knew is after 9/11, there was quote unquote dancing Palestinians in the street. The media showed us over and over again ad nauseum. For some reason, that was a point to show all Americans in a state of trauma and shock watching these buildings fall over and over again was a couple Palestinians who were dancing with no context whatsoever. So there's always been a media effort, highly concentrated and concerted effort to paint Palestinians as quote terrorists, to conflate Palestinians with Islamic extremism or terrorism in the Middle East. Of course, this is all part of that same larger narrative to truncate what's going on over there as some sort of clash of civilizations, right? These people have been fighting over there for thousands of years, but the truth is actually much more simple, and it has a lot to do with colonization and empire. And you know, the whole existence of Israel is really perpetrated on this Orwellian projection of what they actually do to the people that they're colonizing and occupying. And so you just hear constantly, you know, a lot of people will say it's an equal fight, right? You'll hear kind of this condemnation of atrocities on both sides, how once again, they've been fighting for so long, and it's kind of this circular fight, and there's no real way to win it or end. That's simply false. There's a colonized and there's a colonizer. There's oppressed and there's the oppressor. And you know, it's just really, really interesting how the entire existence is really based on propaganda, and Israel employs the best propaganda apparatus in the whole world. It's called Hasbra. They have whole universities that are online editing Wikipedia, editing YouTube comments, posting on Facebook. They get awards, hot air balloon rides around Tel Aviv for whoever can edit the most entries in Wikipedia. That's a real thing. So this is a constant battle of words. It's a battle of information, and that's really so many battles, and front lines are really a war of words and war of propaganda. So Israel maintains its whole existence on that method.
Right, and yeah, and if there's questions throughout, we're going to be doing a lot of Q&A at the end, so please hold on to your, think of, as we're talking, think of things you want to ask for us to expound on more. It's going to try to go quickly over everything.
Mm-hmm.
So first, I wanted to see if I can get this screen share thing to work, but there's something that I'm sure many of you have seen, and that's, hold on, let's get that.
Trying to figure out how to do a picture really quick. Okay, cool.
Cool. Okay, can you see that?
Yeah.
Cool. Okay, so I think a lot of people in this room probably have seen this map depicting the Palestinian loss of land from, it says 1946, but really the first settlements go back to the mid-19th century through currently to today. So I'm not going to go into really detail on each one of these phases, but each one of these phases shows a land grab spearheaded by the Israeli military and the settlement movement. The first stages, pre-1947, what was called the Zionist settler movement, predominantly from Europe, bringing people to settle in Palestine based on the Bible, which was they considered a deed to the land. The ancient biblical kingdoms of the Old Testament. Based on that, Zionist ideologues said that meant people from Europe could migrate to Palestine and set up shop there. Be fine, except that this occurred by kicking people off the land that they were moving to, in large part. I think it's important to say that the Zionist movement, from its inception in the mid-19th century, up until World War II, was extremely unpopular in the Jewish community. Prominent Jewish thinkers all over the world were denouncing it through nearly its entire existence, and still to this day. People like Albert Einstein, taking out an ad in the New York Times to denounce it, things like that. So this was not representative community in the world, let alone in Europe, where a lot of the settlers were coming from. But if you look at the second stage of the map, the partition plan in 1947, this is when Palestine proper, with the borders of the entire country, there is a UN mandate that did not involve the opinions or input of any of the Palestinian people, mandated that 55% of the land of Palestine would be now called Israel. And as you can see, Palestine, green, were cut into three different parts, three small sections. But then when that happened, the Israeli military said the Israelis said it was not enough. They launched a massive military offensive, which turned the borders in what you see in the third map, which depicts the West Bank and Gaza. And I'm going to turn off this screen share now. Sorry. Are we back? Do you see me again?
Yeah.
Cool. Okay. So that's that year, 1948. What occurred then is what's known as the Nakba, the catastrophe, when around 800,000 innocent civilians were violently expelled from their lands in the territories that were green on the maps, white in the maps. A systematic campaign of massacres by Israeli militias and Israeli militaries took place, where hundreds and hundreds of civilians in villages murdered, tortured, children killed, pregnant women killed, all sorts of horrible atrocities with the intention of getting people to flee the land. Were successful. And so many of the refugees that we talk about today, refugees who live in the refugee camps internally displaced in Palestine, and the millions of refugees, 800,000 are refugees, and their children are refugees from the Nakba, from that mass expulsion and series of massacres that took place. But to today, and if you look at this,
and the most common argument that you'll hear from a lot of people is there was no country called Palestine, right? That's what I hear time and again. But what's funny is that there was a country that had distinct cultural heritage, and it also was full of people. And all of the Zionists who colonized the land, actually, there's quotes, endless amount of quotes from them saying, we need to raise every village to the ground. This is all predicated on us actually expelling these people, if not killing them, expelling them. So over and over again for the people who did invade and create this country on top of it.
Yeah, and we actually, our first episode in the series we're doing on Palestine is called How Palestine Became Colonized. Find it on our website, theempirefiles.tv, to get that history. But we're looking again at, right? So we're looking at map 3, we see the West Bank. And this is, according to the Oslo Peace Accords, this is land that Israel itself said could belong to Palestine and will be the site of a future Palestinian state whenever Israel decides that it's okay for the Palestinians to have a state. You don't really realize what the situation in the West Bank, and that's what we're going to be focused on today. So I'm just going to bring up this other image.
And that's where we were. We were in the West Bank for 2 weeks traveling around. So that's why we're going to focus on just this area.
Okay. So you can see that map, yeah?
Yeah.
Okay, so this is a map of the West Bank, right? And so this is what's considered the site of the Palestinian state. But people mostly don't realize that the West Bank is divided up into 3 separate areas. So if you look at the dark green area on the map, and I'll describe what each area means. It's area A, B, and C, and each one has different rules and experiences. The dark green portions of the map, the dark green. Area A is the only areas of the West Bank that have any type of sovereignty for the Palestinians. Area A means the civil administration is by the Palestinian Authority, and security is by the Palestinian Authority. Now, the Palestinian Authority is widely loathed among the Palestinian population. Its leader, Mahmoud Abbas, is extremely unpopular, and every Palestinian we talk to sees the PA as just an extension of the Israeli occupation that act on its behalf and do its bidding. But inside Area A, you're not going to see any Israeli soldiers. You're not going to go through any Israeli checkpoints. You just see a lot of PA soldiers around. Area A was, for all of the problems of the occupation, Area A was a beautiful place. We went to bars in Ramallah that feel like you're at a bar in Brooklyn, artsy cafes, the amazing cultural scene in Palestine, a really amazing, warm country. Everywhere we traveled in Palestine, especially in Area A, we were traveling with a Jewish cameraman. Everywhere we went, we were treated amazing. People were so great to us. We didn't have one negative experience in any of these areas, even though we looked a lot like the people who were on the other side of the wall. Of course, if you have to imagine if you live in an area, like there's these little bubbles of relative, if you're not being targeted by the PA on behalf of the Israelis. But of course, to travel between these areas, you have to go through these other areas on the map. The light green splotches on the map, that's what's called Area B. Still Palestinian civil administration. So all of your government services, it's still run by the Palestinian Authority, but security, as they call it, is by the Israeli forces. So all of the light green areas are under complete military occupation. That means you go through checkpoints constantly. That means you go through, there's regular militarized checkpoints that you have to go through all the time, especially when you're going between the areas. But then there's what is called flying checkpoints. Go off the screen share for a second. Flying checkpoints mean that anywhere the Israelis want to set up a checkpoint, they just stop the road and make you get out and search your car. They'll just decide to block roads at random to make your commute to work harder, to make getting around easier or harder. There's extreme violence at all of these checkpoints and random checkpoints. I'm speaking as someone who was an occupying soldier. I was in the Army for 4 years. I spent a year in Iraq. And I was blown away. The Iraq War was a brutal war and was brutal by the occupying forces, of which I was a part of, compared to the attitudes and treatment I saw coming from the Israeli forces there. I'll show you a little picture of this. To go between areas A and B, it's illegal under Israeli law to go into Area A. And there's these signs at every gate, and so they try to tell Israelis that you'll just get murdered if you walk into Area A. We didn't get murdered and didn't feel like we were going to get murdered
Once
at any
again,
point in Area A, right. Very different story if you're Palestinian going through the gate the other way. You're high likelihood you're going to get murdered. Here's a picture of, these are the guys you see all over Area B. So anywhere you go in Area B, you're going to see hundreds of soldiers just everywhere who are just stopping any car they want and just messing with you or shooting you. And then going back to the map, so the black area in the map, that's what's called Area C. Civil administration by the Israeli government and security by the Israeli military. So Area C is basically Israel. They run it all. It's extremely, Palestinians are banned from 99% of Area C. So, if you have to go to work in one part of Area A and you have to go through Area C, you have to get like a special permit. Sometimes they'll deny the permit. The movement is extremely, extremely difficult. And if you're in there, you're going to deal with the worst types of harassment. So, yeah, and so lots of settlements are going up in Area C, which are which we'll get to the settlement situation. Those are illegal under international law, but so-called legal under Israeli law. But Area B, there's a massive amount of settlements going up in Area B, illegal under international law, but they're also illegal under Israeli law because this is supposed to be Palestinian administration.
So as you can see, the West Bank, which was already a small pocket left for the future Palestinian state, has already been further encroached, where now there's just small dots of settler territory that are being overtaken by these people. So let's talk about our trip. We did not know how crazy it was to actually get into Israel proper. So Palestinians, like Mike was just saying, it's extremely limited in terms of movement. 90% of Palestinians can't get into Tel Aviv. They can't get into Jerusalem, once Palestine was taken over. And they also can't fly out. So if you want to fly out of the country as a Palestinian, you have to go through Jordan or some other just long extra journey that will be very costly and long and arduous. So it's just as possible for Palestinians. When we went in, we had no problem because we look white, we don't have Arab-sounding names, we're American citizens, so that helped us out. But we did speak to one person who was with another girl, not political at all. She just simply had an Arab language book in her bag, and she was not only turned away, but banned for life from getting into the country. So that shows you how kind of strict it is if you are, and she was called an Arab sympathizer. They said, why do you sympathize with Arabs? You have this book. She simply just wanted to speak Arabic and learn Arabic, going to an Arab-speaking place. So that just kind of gives you an insight on how crazy it is. If you have a name that sounds remotely Arab whatsoever, you will be held for hours, sometimes days, or turned away and banned from the country forever. There are tons of Palestinians who left either during the Nakba or afterward, and they are even banned from returning. There's extremely stringent things placed on Palestinians once they leave, that they have to come back every 6 months, pay exorbitant amounts of money in order to keep their status as a resident or even able to visit in the future. So we know many people who actually are never allowed to go back ever. The first thing we saw when we were traveling through from Tel Aviv into the West Bank was a bunch of Palestinians who were forced to park their cars at the bottom of a hill and actually walk up to their villages. And our guide said, yeah, this is just really noticed unless someone was pointing it out to you, that it's just another way to make life hard for people, that they're not allowed to actually drive their cars up to their own homes, sometimes up these hills to get there. Mike just showed you that photo of this sign. Sign getting into the West Bank. And there's a big wall. Of course, apartheid walls are everywhere. This wall is surrounding the West Bank. I'm going to show you right now kind of what it looks like there. The first thing we saw as we were going into the West Bank was an ambulance being stopped. We didn't realize that ambulances were even limited from moving from one area to the next, and many, many people died. They were actually checking someone's body for, I guess, allegedly weapons, even though the guy looked completely immobile and he was laying on a fucking stretcher. So this is how difficult it is to get medical treatment. Many people give birth at these checkpoints. The checkpoints are giant cages with thousands and thousands of people smashed into them in the morning. You know, going to work is kind of universally loathed, and traffic is something that everyone can relate to. But imagine waking up 5 hours before your shift to simply go through a checkpoint and stand in cages where there can be a stampede. Or they actually had to set up birthing centers at some of these checkpoints because it was such a frequent occurrence of how long and often people are trapped in there. So yes, ambulances can't even actually get into some areas.
And they won't let you through. Like if you're giving birth at the checkpoint, the
Yeah.
Israeli soldiers just won't let you through to go to
Yeah.
the hospital. They'll just be like, well, we have to check your vehicle to make sure there's not a bomb, and that's going to take an hour.
Yeah, and there's also no radiation therapy, right? So if you have cancer and you're in the West Bank, you have to get a permit in order to go into Jerusalem to get the proper treatment for your cancer. So a couple things that I didn't realize studying this issue for so long, and watch as many videos as you want, but really nothing will prepare you for how crazy it is once you're there. Like I had no idea how many Palestinians could never get into Jerusalem, which hosts one of their most holiest sites, the Dome of the Rock, next to Mecca. This is an extremely sacred place for Muslims, and they can't even access it. They're denied entry entirely, and if you're lucky to get a permit once in your lifetime, you can maybe get in and pray there. And also the beach is right there. We spoke to several children, and I asked them, you know, what do you dream about? And they said, going to the beach. Can't ever go there in our lives because they're trapped like animals in cages. And this isn't even Gaza we're talking about. We're talking about the West Bank, which people actually mistakenly think is kind of this free zone where Palestinians can live like humans, and they actually can't. They're super limited in their mobility. We were there within hours. You know, there's gunshots going off all the time. We know that Palestinians are completely disarmed. It's even illegal to protest in the West Bank. So we knew that a lot of these people weren't Palestinians shooting guns. It's settlers in the Israeli military. So very unsettling. All day, every day, you just hear gunshots going off all around you. Within hours of us being there, at the first refugee camp we were at, we heard about a guy who had just been executed by Israeli security forces. He was farming in his village. They claimed, and this is what you'll hear a lot because there's never any evidence to back it up, thought he was going to lunge at them or charge them. It's kind of like the police here in America, except even more hyped up and trigger happy, if you can imagine. So there, it's like if someone just looks at you cross-eyed, they'll get executed. And that's what happened to this guy. We went to the funeral that day. It was horrible. It was just, you know, the people like Sam Harris and these new atheists who try to paint Palestinians as a death cult, who don't feel pain or get sad when their children die, are sick. Because it just takes you a second of being around these people. They're human beings, and they suffer loss just like anyone else does. And I was in a room full of wailing women mourning the loss of their husband who had just been executed. It was absolutely devastating. And you know, this is that they have an apparatus in place to actually put up banners, posters, as soon as someone else dies. And you'll see these covering everywhere in the West Bank. And this is another thing that people like who are Islamophobes point to and say, oh, look, the culture of martyrdom, right? No, it's just that death is such a regular occurrence that you need to honor people who die. Just like we put up photos of people who die. Can you imagine if everyone that you meet has a horror story of one of their siblings or relatives being executed for essentially no reason? And so that's really the only thing these people have. And so many people are jailed and killed that really that's a way to keep their legacy carried on. You know, another really interesting thing, get into Gaza. Gaza, of course, is a walled-off, actual open-air prison that houses 1.1 million internally displaced refugees, up to 2 million people. You know, this is a punishment for Palestinians. They're sent to Gaza to die. Get out. Egypt, Rafah crossing, close collaborators with the Israeli government. So Gaza has been a hugely important issue to both of us. Mike has gone before to try to deliver aid. These people are not only walled off and prevented from any sort of real life, but intake is monitored by the Israeli government. That's how sick the situation is. So we wanted to go in there because, of course, it's one of the gravest humanitarian crises of our time. Unfortunately, when we applied for a press pass once we were there, it got picked up to Netanyahu's hand-picked press spokesperson, Ron Paz, and he denied our entry into Gaza. And his reason was that we were too pro-Palestinian, because we had tweeted that we wanted the occupation to be over, of course, said some other couple revealing things about our trip, and he didn't like that very much. He said that apparently there has to be an objectivity test before you go report on something that I'm funding with my tax dollars. So I can never get into Gaza because Netanyahu's spokesperson said that I'm too pro-Palestinian, really, in order to report and see this horrible situation with your own eyes. So.
I'll tell you about the Gaza funeral thing. I got to.
Which one?
When we were leaving the funeral.
Oh, yeah. So once again, when we were leaving that funeral, and this just kind of shows you how the Israeli military treats even someone who dies and people who go to mourn and pay respects to the family of someone who passed away. We left the funeral, and all of a sudden there was a roadblock set up. Like Mike was saying, there's flying checkpoints randomly. There'll be big blockades trapping people in their villages where they're forced to walk through mountains. I'm not even joking. And we saw this firsthand. Hours after we got there leaving this funeral, there was a roadblock with a bunch of troops who had just tear gassed everyone. Scenes up, just pointed at everyone, and we're like, oh shit. We had a picture of the guy in the front of our car, and we just had to turn around. We're like, oh my God, we need to get the hell out of here. That's how close you are all the time to getting shot there. They have their hands on the trigger everywhere they go, and they're ready. They're ready and willing. So, and they don't give a fuck who stands in their way.
Yeah, and they set up that roadblock outside the guy's funeral. No attack, no one was throwing rocks at the soldiers, nothing like that. But they specifically set it up just to mess with everyone who went to the funeral, to terrorize them. So they had just killed an innocent man, all of their family and friends go to this funeral, and everyone leaving, they have burning tires, tear gas things going off, pointing guns at everyone. And then we had to take like an hour detour to get back to where we were going because it was a major road that was blocked off. For no other reason than to just drive the knife in deeper to all the people that were mourning the death of that man.
So we can split up this one because you're supposed to go down. Just explain it until like how there's these.
Sure, yeah. So we didn't really show you some more pictures of the, when you're in Area B and in Area C, you're going to see a lot of this. These are the towers and the apartheid wall, and these are just everywhere. I mean, this is in Bethlehem, and so that's walling off an area with Israeli settlements. But you'll see these outposts with just cement walls and these towers speckled throughout the entire place. Flying checkpoints are a little different. It's like what I showed you before. It's just soldiers who just in the middle of the road decide to search a bunch of people. When we were passing through some of these flying checkpoints, I mean, this is the attitude of the Israeli soldiers. When we would get stopped, right? Every time you get stopped, I mean, you have guns in your faces. I mean, there's no time you go through a checkpoint and there's not a gun pointed in your face with someone with their finger on the trigger. But as soon as the Israeli soldiers see that we were white, they would immediately call on the radio, there's people with Arabs. And they'd be like, why the hell are you with Arabs? And they would stop us for a long time. We'd be scared that the people we were with, Palestinians were going to get arrested because you just get arbitrarily arrested for anything. Extremely nerve-wracking. And, like one of the times we went through the checkpoint, the soldiers waved us through the checkpoint and saying we didn't have to stop in the middle of the night. And then after we go through the checkpoint, they pulled their laser sight on their rifle and are shining it on the driver. So I'm seeing this laser sight come in the car on the body of the driver, and I thought he was about a second away from getting shot. Luckily, we saw it early and slammed on the brakes. But that's just the kind of regular harassment you get, everywhere you go throughout the occupied area.
Talk about the.
Oh, right. Yeah. So we're going to show you again this the main checkpoint that we were going through, which was this is we told you about the town of Ramallah, which is just like a amazing, beautiful place. This is what's called Kalandia checkpoint, which when you're leaving Ramallah, going into Area B or Area C, you have to go through this checkpoint. And just an example of, there's so much violence all the time from the Israelis. I mean, we're just going through the checkpoint, and as we're going through the checkpoint, our guide, a journalist named Dan Cohen, is explaining to us something that happened at that checkpoint just a month prior. At that checkpoint, there was a woman, a pregnant woman, who had just gotten a pass to go to a hospital in Jerusalem. And so she was having to go through this checkpoint. It was her first time ever being granted access to go into that area. And she didn't know that you couldn't walk up to the checkpoint. You could only drive up to the checkpoint. So she's walking up, once pregnant, and the Israeli soldiers just immediately shoot her and kill her. She had a young brother that was with her who ran up to her body to try to help her, and they shot and killed him too. And that happened right before we went there. And as we're pulling up to this checkpoint, his story, there was an elderly man slowly walking up to the checkpoint, and immediately the soldiers start shooting at him. And like, our car is like right behind this guy. I mean, this is like, you know, not a situation where you're shooting at a guy against a wall. I mean, it was all cars behind him, and they start shooting live rounds at him. Luckily, the guy turned tailed and got out of there really quickly, and thankfully, they didn't shoot him in the back as they often do. Open, regular violence that, I mean, we were just witnessing it at every single turn.
And as we went through the checkpoint, the Israeli soldier actually had the audacity to tell us to be safe. Stay safe, guys. It's a crazy world out there. It's like, yeah, no shit. You guys are indiscriminately firing upon a line of vehicles. Yeah, old people. You know, and a lot of people say, okay, it's outrageous to call it an apartheid state. Well, the definition of apartheid is having separate laws for different groups of people. And you can see it in the license plates. They have Jewish-only settler license plates. They're yellow. And the Arab-Palestinian license plates, which are white. And that really, wow, you get treated differently going through these checkpoints. I mean, when we were in a settler plate car flying through them, really no problem. The second, like Mike said, we were in an all-Palestinian car with white plates. We were treated insanely and held up for almost 2 hours with our stuff taken from us and the M16s pointed in our faces. So, you know, you hear a lot about rocks. Oh, Palestinians throw rocks. You see photos a lot in the media of Palestinian kids with rocks. Look, rocks is really the only thing that they have because they have no weapons. And so, of course, rocks, when they do throw them, they're mostly at tanks or walls. Doesn't really hurt Israeli soldiers who are geared to the T with militarized riot gear. This still affects them so much, apparently, because they can't even stand to have rocks thrown at their giant tanks. They've now employed a law that can jail Palestinian youth up to 20 years for throwing one rock. And not only that, but just anything you do. There's incitement, you know, on social media, even if you just say something about the occupation or cite a poem, which a woman just did and was actually sent to prison for 6 months.
An Israeli woman. An
Israeli Palestinian woman, yeah. So this is the kind of crackdown that you're seeing all across what remains of Palestine is arbitrary arrests. 40% of Palestinian men in the West Bank have been in prison. Mike was telling you the story in the car. We were with 3 Palestinian men who had all just gotten out of prison. They were in there for about 10 years or something, probably throwing a rock or something insanely dumb. Everyone has a horror story. You know, and I wanted to tell you also about what was that called when they're put in jail for 6 months and then they basically just...
Oh, the administrative detention.
Yeah, there's something called administrative detention where people are put in jail indiscriminately, let's say for 6 months. And then at the 6-month peak, there's something called administrative detention where you can just elongate it for another 6 months without any charges. So these people are just permanently in this hiatus state in prison without any charges levied against them whatsoever. And they're just in there for years languishing. There's still so many people in there from 20 years ago for throwing rocks during the Intifada.
And thousands of children also. I mean, Israel is well known for jailing children like no other country. Mm-hmm. I mean, 12 years old, you're in jail for extremely long periods of time, tortured, put in solitary confinement. And you know, that policy of 20 years in jail for throwing rocks, that's actually moderating their policy. They used to have a policy during one of the uprisings where they would, if you got caught throwing rocks, instead of being sent to jail, they would break your arms or leg. And so that policy of the Israeli military, they were ordered, if you catch a kid throwing stones, take his arm and just break his arm in half. And it became kind of a PR disaster because so many videos and images were getting out of Israeli soldiers taking little 12-year-old kids, putting their arm up against a curb and stomping it until their arm snaps in half. So they implemented this more humane law where you just go to jail for the rest of your life if
Right.
You throw in.
Yeah, and the conviction rate is 99%. Real fair judicial system there. Hey, the only democracy in the Middle East, am I right? And then, so let's talk about Hebron. Hebron is a really, really interesting example of visual apartheid. It was a huge bustling city. About 30 years ago, a group of Zionist settlers went into a hotel in the middle of the city and just said, this is ours. And they occupied this hotel. Whenever this happens, of course, as Mike will explain in a second, the Israeli military immediately comes and protects the settlers wherever they put up an encampment. And so this town became a militarized zone. Aged areas where Palestinians can live, checkpoints. They call it a ghost town because the settlers took over this area and have made this giant occupied center around it where now everyone's cleared out. There's just a few settlers living in this huge area that they've basically occupied. Military people just walking around. We wanted to show you a couple photos of how crazy it is. This is, it can take kids 5 hours sometimes to cross through to get to school. And, a lot of people say, well, why don't they just move out? Because this is their home. They have nowhere to go. The Palestinians who continue to live within this zone can't leave because if the second that they leave their home, it'll be occupied and taken over by a settler. The cages that you'll see in a second are actually cages that the Palestinians put up to protect. And as you can see, there's guard towers just above this little market. It used to be this bustling market, and it's completely occupied by guard towers and now cages because the settlers throw so much trash onto the Palestinians below. Human excrement, garbage, food, and you can see some of this here. I actually had a person tell me, oh, that's because the Israelis are trying to protect their rockets from being shot from below. I'm like, no, I don't think that's going to stop a rocket. As you can see, diapers, trash.
Yeah, so the settlers live above and the Palestinians live below. And so they just throw toilet water, everything just down at Palestinians who are shopping at the market.
And this is really the way that settlements are constructed all over Palestine. It's called the architecture of oppression because you build directly on top of an Arab village. On the hilltops, you can really just be looking down and kind of controlling the whole situation there. Hebron was surreal. It was extremely disturbing to walk through these areas and very sad. I mean, we talked to one shop owner whose pregnant wife, again, got killed during the second Intifada, just executed, and nothing ever happened to the person who killed her. And I'm talking to this guy who owns a little rug shop, and behind him there's just a mountain of trash. What a crazy life to be living here and just see this all happen over time and just be completely ignored, really, by the international community in a large sense.
Yeah, so that was Hebron, which is a site of a lot of, takeover by Israeli settlers of Palestinians' homes who've lived there for a very long time and really trying to make conditions so bad that people live willingly. They're more than happy to kill the Palestinians to take their home. But their strategy really is to inflict fear and terror and so that they flee the area willingly. And so that's why there's such extreme militarized checkpoints and things like that there.
Oh yeah, and if someone dies within that zone, you can't take or if someone gets sick, an ambulance will refuse to pick up a Palestinian, so you have to actually drag the body down to the checkpoint in order to get help.
Yeah, and right. And they won't let people get medical attention. And things like that.
So first talk about the bulldozer stuff.
Yeah.
Why it's so crazy.
Right. And so we're going to get into now, one of the issues with the settlements is it's not just that a settlement is showing up and building a settlement and saying we're here to just live in this area. The settlements move into areas where there is already people living, expand out into a village. I mean, there's masses of open space in Palestine and in Israel. And all of the areas, there is just a huge expanse of land. There is a lot of empty land. But settlements put themselves where Palestinians are living and then begin this process, which I'll explain, of demolishing all the homes and taking it and turning it into, like Florida-style tract housing. But when they demolish homes, I'll show you this image first, they're stealing them from people and then, they're bulldozing them in front of them. There's a Palestinian man who is unable to watch the destruction of the home that he built while Israeli soldiers guard. Who knows who Rachel Corrie is? Rachel Corrie was a young American activist who went to Palestine with a volunteer group who was resisting these illegal home demolitions. And Rachel Corrie, in an act of protest, stood in front of a bulldozer that was going to be illegally bulldozing a Palestinian home. That bulldozer, that armored bulldozer driven by an Israeli, they had made a decision to not let pesky, young women, American activists do this kind of thing. And so they ran her over and they killed her, crushed her under the bulldozer. That's the policies of Israel, and they're so proud of it, Corrie with the bulldozer. And they're so proud of using bulldozers to destroy Palestinian homes that we even saw this in Israel, a giant statue of one of the armored bulldozers.
Nice commemorative state tool of aggression. We didn't know if it was to commemorate Rachel Corrie's death or just the millions of Palestinians who are uprooted from their homes with this.
There's a lot about
it was pretty surreal.
Popular attitudes in Israel.
Yeah, this wasn't the Caterpillar Corporation. This was just a literal
That's inside Israel.
Yep.
But so the reason that's this is a situation that's especially important for people to know about right now, because home demolitions are at a 10-year high. Of course, through the entire history of Palestine, homes have been being demolished to make way for settlements. But 2016 is by far the highest in the past 10 years. Palestinian homes have been demolished, just like the one that I showed you, and hundreds more are being slotted for demolition, and people have demolition orders that they're doing everything they can to try to resist. So I'm going to explain how settlements actually work, right? Is that where I'm at?
Yeah.
Cool. Okay, so...
And how they're different.
Right. So a Palestinian village, any settler from anywhere in the world, if they say they have some Jewish heritage, they can move. So a lot of people are from the U.S. who do this. People who grow up in Boston or Los Angeles or whatever. Just white guys who decide, I want to go be a settler. They can go to a Palestinian village, and they can go to any Palestinian area and just set up shop. Here's an example of one of the ways they do it. Just set up a trailer like this one. So they'll go to the top of a hill in a Palestinian village, and they'll just put a trailer there, right? Once that trailer is there, and if it's in Area C, they can get authorization for it, and it'll be technically legal, but still illegal under international law, although a lot of the settlements in Area C are illegal. But anywhere in Area B, what I described to you before, these are illegal settlements. And so they'll go into Area B, into a Palestinian neighborhood, put up this trailer. And even though that trailer, that new settlement, is illegal under Israeli and international law, the Israeli government will then run power lines to the settlement. They'll dig water pipes for the settlement. They'll build settler-only roads leading away from the settlement. And then they deploy soldiers to set up a military outpost right next to the settlement. So although it's illegal, they go protect it and bring it all of the services it needs. That one trailer becomes more and more trailers. And then what they do is the settlers start to carry out a campaign of terror against the village that is below them on the hill. Groups of 12 or more will go down into the Palestinian village, throw rocks at people, commit arson attacks, firebomb people's houses, firebomb people's cars, destroy people's olive trees, which is like one of the biggest agricultural incomes is olive trees. And then when the settlers go and attack the Palestinians, it comes and protects them while they attack the Palestinians. And if any Palestinian does anything to defend themselves, then the Israelis start shooting people with guns, shooting people with tear gas. And then through that process of terrorizing the Palestinians, then the Israeli government starts granting what's called demolition orders. The Israeli military goes and delivers demolition orders to people in the village. They don't even bring it to your door. They leave the demolition orders under rocks around town. So you have to try to find them to see if your house has a demolition order. A few days after the demolition order, they come to your house, they take your home, and they crush it, demolish it, and evict it. There's some recourse in the Israeli courts if you find the demolition order in time, but in the end, every single home gets demolished that gets a demolition order. Then the village is demolished, and the Israeli settlement expands into, I'll show you a picture of what they look like. after this process is complete.
And really the whole point of doing this is not to coexist with a future Palestinian state. It's to take over all of Palestine and continue the original plan, which is to expel and expunge all the indigenous inhabitants and to leave no one behind. Otherwise, there'd be no problem to build the settlements in the vast areas of empty land. But they have to come do it on top of the remaining villages, which are very few. And as you can see, they're rapidly shrinking. And this is what it turns into, this kind of an abomination here. And of course, you know, think about who would do this. Who would go over there and be a settler, especially an American citizen? And, you know, when the Gaza offensive, the straight up massacre, where over 500 children were killed 2 years ago, Operation Protective Edge. When it happened, I remember the first couple Israelis who got killed, most of them soldiers, the first couple were American soldiers who were living in Israel, serving in the IDF, and actually just wanted to police and kill Arabs. And I think that that's a really sick mentality to move to Israel and, you know, be able to police Palestinians. It's sick. And this is kind of the mentality of settlers. They're fanatical religious extremists who feel this entitlement, and they feel dehumanization toward the Palestinian indigenous people of the land, and so they want to go over there and plant a trailer right there on top of your house. And basically, to them, the Palestinians are less than human, because really, how else can you manage doing that? To actually move to another country and think that it's yours, and move on top of someone else's village and say, this is mine. I mean, that's fucking sick. So you can imagine that the people's mentality, there's so much terrorism committed on behalf of the settlers. And think about this, they're all armed. I mean, as you just saw, I mean, settlers walk around with M16s. They go jogging with M16s around them strapped, straight up strapped. They look like they're wearing suicide vests. I mean, just like packed ammo, looks like they're stacked with grenades and stuff. And they're just walking around these Arab villages. So there's constant terrorism, constant attacks on Palestinians all the time. But one attack in particular that happened not too long ago was very devastating, and it got a lot of attention, rightly so, even though this is more than an aberration. This happens quite frequently. But there was a family who was firebombed. 20 settlers came down in a particular village and firebombed 2 houses. One of the houses had an infant, a couple months old, the father, the mother, and the son named Ahmed, the Dawashi family. And Ahmed's grandfather describes, you know, people saw the house burning and they came out and tried to see what was going on. The settlers, about 15 of them, had taken the family members outside. It wasn't that they just burned alive inside the home. They took them outside, poured gasoline in their mouths, and watched them burn. The mother was miraculously, didn't die right then. She died later on, about a month later, after numerous attempts at skin grafts. And Ahmed actually survived. He hid very cleverly from the settlers, and he survived. We're going to show you a photo of Ahmed, the only remaining survivor of this family, who was firebombed for no reason other than living and being Palestinian in the village that settlers wanted to take over. So here's this poor little kid who was in the hospital for about a year. But this is the mentality. See, you know, we visited his grandfather. He still has burns covering 80% of his body. His life will never be the same. We went to their house. He now lives with his grandfather down photo. A super cute kid, but he never can, because it's not like this traumatic event happened and now he can live a normal life and recover. It's that these people still want to kill him. At the hospital, there were actual protesting the fact that he was alive. There were people standing out there holding up 3. You know, we killed 3 and there's 1 more to go. Meaning that little poor kid, Ahmed, 5 years old or whatever, they still wanted him to be killed. And we spoke to his grandfather, who said he needs to stay in a different room every night. They had to bar up the windows because they're afraid of Molotov cocktails coming through, burning their house. They want us gone. We get constant threats and harassment from settlers who still want Ahmed to die. And that really struck me, because this kid, you know, even the most innocent aren't safe from this fanatical terror that's going on. And it was just really, really horrifying. Oh yeah, and nothing happened to them, essentially. You know, 15 people did this. they caught they only basically arrested one guy, and he was in jail for 6 months, and now he's out. So I don't know if he got out like on some sort of mental illness or whatever.
There's one person who they know was one of the people that was like, helping burn them alive when they were out of the house. 17 years old, the Israeli court said it would be too damaging to his mental health to go to jail, so he served 0 punishment.
Yeah.
And the other guy, he's still, no one's punished.
Yeah, and so these settlers, I mean, they're so crazy, and it's such an audacious thing that's going on, and that the Israeli government likes to paint to the rest of the world, oh no, this is an aberration, these people don't represent Israeli society, but really, why else coming and protecting them immediately? Every time there's a terrorist attack in the rest of the world, Netanyahu's on the ground saying, come to Israel, come move to Israel. Because it's not just about a Jewish state, it's about a Jewish white supremacist state. It's Jewish supremacy, it's also white supremacy. So they want to expunge, everyone who's Palestinian, and that's why you can kick people out who are residents and say to someone living in France, to their village. It's one of the most astounding things going on in the world. And because of the media perception, it's that much harder to explain the reality on the ground.
Yeah, and I mean, that attack just shows the depth of how it goes. And, the very same people that, it was being there, being in that house with Ahmed, with his grandfather, it was just like one of the most terrifying things you can ever experience. I mean, we hear gunshots going off while we're there, deciding to take pot shots at the town. But every night they know, I mean, the settlers, the people who did the attack, they literally go to the village again and demonstrate and say, we're coming back to kill the kid. Mm-hmm. But they can't do anything to defend themselves except put bars on their windows. Their house is firebombed. It was like reminiscent of Klan terror in the South, when the KKK could go around and murder and lynch people, and the police would assist them in doing it. You to defend yourself. At least black people in the South could arm themselves and shoot back at the Klan when they came. Palestinians aren't allowed to have guns. You go to jail for the rest of your life. And so we're just in this house where this completely innocent family knows that every single night they're waiting for when they're going to come finish the job and burn all of them alive. And that's representative of what's going on everywhere in the West Bank.
I wanted to say one more thing. The refugee camps that we stayed at, there's multiple throughout the West Bank. And it was after the Nakba, the international community said this was completely illegal, all of these massacres that took place, expelling so many more people than the original borders of Israel. And so they said these refugees have the absolute right to return to their villages. So they're still languishing in refugee camps, millions of them. We visited 2 of them, and like I said, it's not like you can just live there. They're raided almost daily by Israeli forces. Rounds, flashbang munitions, people die all the time, children are kidnapped, executed for just standing there playing. I mean, it is such a crazy situation just being inside of these refugee camps, because people have no idea that there's so many internally living within the country still.
And I'm going to tell one little short story, and then we'll go into Q&A. But just to wrap up, I mean, it was an extremely, terrifying experience being there, and extremely depressing one. I mean, just seeing the level of oppression and violence and, seemingly, desperation and hopelessness. But I know there's one story that really showed the real situation of Palestinian heroism and resilience and determination to refuse to just be cleansed from the land that they're from. This is a photo of a flag in the village of Sebastia in the West Bank. Can you see it full screen? Can you see the flag?
And putting up Palestinian flags is illegal in some areas.
It's illegal to put up a Palestinian flag in the West Bank. Really, the great democratic society that Israel has for these people. Okay, so I'm going to bring up this one. Okay, so if you can see that better.
Yeah.
So here's a flag on a hilltop in the town of Sebastia. And like I said, it's illegal to put up a Palestinian flag because it's just this unacceptable, even in your own town. So this is a Palestinian town, illegal to put up the Palestinian flag. So with this flag going back and forth, where how do I get out of here? Palestinians will put up the flag on the top of this hill, right? There's a settlement nearby. The town's under constant settler attack. Yeah, there's constant settler attacks trying to take over the town. And there's a cat and mouse game where Palestinians go put up that flag on the top of the hill. It comes and destroys it, destroys the flagpole, takes the flag, gets rid of it, and then Palestinians go and put the flag back. The Israeli military started getting very annoyed that they were, doing this really unthinkable act of raising their flag. So they started around where the flag would be put up and shooting Palestinians when they went to go put up the flag. So the day that we were there, the night before we showed up, 2 men got shot putting up the flag by Israeli soldiers who were hiding in the bushes. And by the time we got there, less than 12 hours later, that flag was back up on that hilltop. So the Palestinians in that village, knowing, waiting to shoot them in the head if they tried to put that flag up, they did not care. And they went and they put it up anyway. I think that speaks to the real spirit of the Palestinian people who are facing the most insurmountable odds, one of the greatest countries in the world, but they refuse to back down, where the entire world is lined up against them, or all the big superpowers anyway. And they still fight. I mean, having everything taken away from them, they still demonstrate just a symbolic act of resistance. They're able to carry it out with amazing courage, like you wouldn't believe.
Thank you so much for listening, you guys, and for coming out tonight.
And we'll take any questions.
Yeah, take any
Does anybody have questions? Let's start it off. Sure. Yeah.
So having these atrocities in mind, do you believe a bipartisan solution is possible?
Did you hear that?
Can you repeat that?
So having these atrocities in mind, do you believe a bipartisan solution is possible?
Of what solution?
Do you believe there is a two-state solution? Is that?
Okay, so this is another thing that I didn't understand until at least just looking at kind of the 3 territories that now are getting approached. The two-state solution is something that Netanyahu actually says exists. And what it would be if Israel did create a Palestinian state for the Palestinians and give them so-called equal rights, it would be 3 ghettoized areas that would have no real linkage between them for freedom of movement. You have the West Bank, who's, it's partitioned. Israel is now surrounding all 3 of these areas, Jerusalem, Gaza, and the West Bank. So I actually don't see how, on looking at just these 3 territories, I don't see how that can be one state. Another thing that's really important to know is a lot of the Israelis that we talk to, and this kind of, based on what Netanyahu actually said exists right now, a lot of the Israelis said that they do want a 2-state solution so that the state, they can just kill them off and go to war with them proper, and completely obliterate them that way. So I do think that the only solution at this point is to have Jewish supreme state and have equal rights for everyone within one inclusive state, the way it should be, for equal rights for all.
Yeah, where's this other state going to be? It's the question now. I mean, all of Area C is Israeli settlements. A lot of Area B is settlements. The only little pockets of territory where there are Palestinians who have freedom from occupation, I mean, you're going to have a state that's 100 little dots on a map that's separated by a hostile state that you have to pass through to get between neighborhoods. I mean, it's so, the reality is there's no other place to have a two-state solution. I mean, doesn't seem very feasible. And everyone we talked to felt the same. They were like, where is it supposed to be? And it's like right now they have the rights to that area, and they're still completely infringed upon.
Right.
Of course. What should I be trying to talk about?
Yeah, you want to try to go to the mic? Yeah, maybe. Yeah.
Okay, I was just curious. So from your experience in Israel and West Bank, does it seem like the BDS movement is having any positive impact on the possibilities for change for moving forward?
So the BDS movement is having such a huge impact that universities are preemptively banning BDS initiatives across the country. I think that tells you everything you need to know. And also governments all across Europe are banning this kind of preemptive initiative to boycott, divest from Israel. So I think that shows you that they are quite scared. They're bringing out Roseanne Barr to speak out of BDS is and the anti-BDS movement in Israel's biggest proponent is Roseanne Barr, apparently. So yes, they're terrified. They know, like I was saying before, the perception is everything. So once the world wakes up to what's going on, obviously the only solution is really to boycott from the outside, to divest from Israel. Just like we saw with South Africa, of course, you didn't see the white supremacists within South Africa coming to their senses, right, and saying, you know what, we're not going to have an apartheid state. It was forcing them from the outside. And the more Israel exists over time, the more fascistic and theocratic it becomes. You now have people that were considered religious nutcases, kind of similarly to the U.S. in a weird sense. You see kind of the Tea Party people taking over positions who just have bizarre religious ideologies. You kind of see the same thing happening in Israel, where in order for this to continue to function and exist, it needs to become increasingly fascistic. It needs to become increasingly kind of this self-fulfilling messianic fantasy. And you see more and more people taking over the Knesset in Israel that have and adhere to these insane religious theocratic fantasies.
Yeah, and one more thing about the two-state solution. I mean, it would be great if there was some progress towards that, but we know from what's called the Palestine Papers, which were leaked documents showing the negotiation between the PA and Israeli forces for a two-state solution. The Palestinian Authority offered up every single possible concession to create a two-state solution, everything they would ask for, even the most unacceptable things to Palestinian society, they offered it, and the Israelis laughed them out of the room. Israel does not want a two-state solution. They have always acted in a way that prevents that from happening. Approving these new illegal settlements throughout Area B, that's proof that they have no interest in a peaceful two-state solution. They say very openly they want all, as they say, all Arabs out of the area.
Oh, and also SodaStream, that big company that would make soda real time that you see in like Bed Bath and Beyond and shit. Well, that company was in the West Bank operating, and because of the BDS movement, it actually forced it to close. Occupied territory now, so that shows you really the force of this movement. And yeah, no matter what, how much people want to ignore it, it is having a huge impact.
And if anything else too, I mean, yes, it's having this important economic impact, but the Palestinian people also need solidarity.
Yeah.
I mean, it means so much. I mean, everyone we talk to, they're like, when you go to a demonstration for Palestine on your campus or anywhere in the US, like that gets back to Palestine and it means everything. So it's just that act of being part of their struggle and showing solidarity with their struggle, I think is important for all of us to be part of.
Especially because the media and international community paints them as terrorists. I mean, Netanyahu conflates Palestinians with ISIS all the time. It's batshit crazy. And now that social media is becoming more accessible, people are online more. Every time Israel goes on a complete assault against Gaza, let's say, they're seeing these photos real time. There's no hiding behind this kind of propagandistic cartoons and memes the Israeli government puts out with its Hasbara. And the more people wake up to that, it resonates with Palestinians to see people out in the streets and really voicing for their support. That means the world to them, because to them, they've been marginalized and forgotten about for so long.
Anybody else have a question? Dave?
Yeah, can you hear me from here?
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, so did you get a chance while you were there to talk to people on the ground about kind of what their ideas or like what their hopes or ideas are for like solutions or like strategies for kind of resolving the conflict, and like what kind of were some of the things people said, if you did?
Like Palestinians or Israelis?
Yeah, Palestinians.
Palestinians that we talked to, it varied. I did not talk to one Palestinian who said anything remotely genocidal about Israelis or Jewish people whatsoever. What I found really surprising was once I said I was American, people would be like, "We love America, America," and I'm like, "Why? We're funding your misery. Why would you love us?" Like, the American government's doing, as opposed to like what American citizens do. It's just a very different reaction than I think Palestinians would have coming here, saying, "We're Palestinian." People would be like, "Get the fuck out of my store." So that was really interesting. But in terms of the solution, look, a lot of people there, so high, the Palestinian Authority is so corrupt, they see it as kind of this proxy occupation. What they told us was the biggest solution is waking up the American people and government, because they know what the reality is, that these walls would not exist, this occupation would not be able to exist without American tax dollars, and they know how strong the media perception is, so I think that's why the solidarity is so important to them, because they see Americans waking up and they know that that is the first step. Because I think to them, they don't really see much hope within Israeli society. As I said, it's getting just more and more right-wing and moderate at this point. In order to maintain that sort of structure and system, it has to be increasingly right-wing and closed off and more constrictive over time. So I think that they're really looking to the American people to end this soon. And the one state thing, I think really, I didn't really think that we talked to any Palestinians who said that they wanted a two-state, because I think that they know what that really means for them.
Yeah, and like talking to Palestinians who were in villages that were under attack by settlers and having expansion into their village. There's an episode that'll be released today about our travels in one of these villages. And, this guy who lives in a house that's under constant attack, he was saying, I would be totally fine if the settlers just moved in over there and then left us alone. But instead, they moved on the hill atop my house and throw rocks at my house every day and set my car on fire. So there's not like this, like, oh, we hate immigrants and we don't want anyone who's not Arab Palestinian to live here. Everyone we talked to was like, we'd be fine if they just came and were chill. The side we got on the other side, when we went to like Tel Aviv, the Jewish quarter in Jerusalem, and we talked to first array of average Israelis, in one way or another, every one of them will say, well, the solution is all of the Arabs leaving and going to Jordan and going to Lebanon and getting out of really hard territory.
Right. I mean, to be considered a leftist in Israel is, first of all, it's not only rare, but to be considered a leftist, you basically just want a more humane occupation because he's blacklisted. It's a more humane occupation. That's only really the people who are lucky enough or ballsy enough to go into the occupied areas because they think that they're going to get executed or something. But really, very few people even go and see this because there's this forced segregation to maintain this fear.
Yeah. Yeah, thanks.
So I have a friend who was living in Gaza, actually, and he currently is getting his master's degree, believe it or not, in Britain. Was able to do that, but it took a lot of maneuvering. But one of the things, we had a conversation about, the situation he was in, and he was saying that one of the things that really hurt is he felt like the other Arab countries were not, formulating this pan-Arab movement to help the Palestinians. He really felt like they had kind of turned their back on them. And I'm curious if you heard any of that kind of expression or what your thoughts are on that.
Definitely, the reason for the forming of the Palestinian Liberation Organization, the uprisings that took place in the 90s. I mean, this was all because there is an acknowledgement that help was not going to come from outside anymore. I mean, there were times in history where neighboring countries were trying to aid. Egypt under Nasser sent troops to try to help Palestinians. Iraq under the Ba'ath Party tried to help. Other governments played a reactionary role, like the King of Jordan was an Israeli collaborator. And so, yes, there were moments where nationalist governments were trying to aid the situation. And Syria took in massive amounts of Palestinian refugees and would automatically grant citizens to any Palestinian refugee who came into Syria. Iraq took a lot of refugees. I mean, so there were countries, Lebanon, Palestinian refugees are treated extremely terribly. They live in very, very bad conditions, intentionally by the Lebanese government. And so, yeah, I mean, there's a feeling that they're in the fight alone, that they're not going to be getting help from the outside, from the U.S., from any other neighboring Arab country, and that the fight is on them. And I think that is why there is such a strong culture of resistance and resilience. It's people that recognize that where they are, that's where they're going to have to make their stand, and no help is coming. And that's why it's people are so strong and willing to stand up.
I was just going to say also that there's I don't know if you guys heard of the name Elor Azaria. we were talking about, which a bunch of settlers just came in and occupied this town and then became this huge apartheid-style militarized zone. We went in there and talked to some settler kids who were just hanging out with troops. I guess they just pick it with them. And the first thing he said to us, he called a guy that we were with the N-word because we were the black guy. So that was the first thing he said. And then the next thing he said was, "You're with Arabs, shoot all Arabs in the head." But right there where we talked to this kid, was executed. It was on video by a human rights organization called Bet Salem. The Palestinian family who filmed the execution is now getting death and rape threats weekly. But viral. And so because it became viral in the international community, the Israeli government had to do something about it. So they, basically just like cops here in America, summary execution and kind of shoot to kill is something that's encouraged, indoctrinated, institutionalized in Israeli society, just like it is in police forces here. In fact, our police train within the Israeli military, by the way. The NYPD has an office in Israel. But aside from that, so because of that, Israeli society erupted when this soldier who executed an unarmed Palestinian man was simply slapped on the wrist. He wasn't even put in jail, he wasn't charged with anything, he just kind of was put on house arrest for 6 months, where he could still go home for holidays and hang out, but he wasn't on the force. And people were so upset at that. I liken it to if a cop kills an unarmed black man here, there's huge protests that are there, fascist rallies in support of this soldier who killed this guy. That kind of shows you the climate. It's kind of this opposite climate there where people were so outraged that there was anything remotely being done to this guy. And they were just saying, don't tie our hands from committing genocide, basically, or ethnic cleansing. This is the path that we need to take in order to be safe. And a lot of it's done in this Orwellian language. Like I was saying before, there's a lot of religious extremists getting into the Knesset. This one guy named Yehuda calls himself a peace activist, but really his mentor is just this crazy guy who slaughters goats at meetings and talks about conquering all Arabs and stuff. So it's incredibly surreal state. In order to be an actual leftist and a videographer there, you're risking your life every day. The guy that we were traveling with, Dan Cohen and David Sheen, everyone should check out their work, but they're cataloging and filming this temple movement. It's extremists who are taking over the government and shaping Israeli society into a very scary fascist one. And they're risking their lives every day. They get assaulted and accosted if someone sees them with a camera at one of these. Where's your flag? Because you have to have a fucking Israeli flag tied around you like a cape if you're accepted in this society. So that's the kind of agitation going on all the time and the kind of climate. It is really, really scary. And, we went to this anti-refugee rally. It was insane. I mean, they were burning effigies of a mayor who simply allowed a couple of Ethiopian refugees in and gave them room at a school. And there was a huge rally of people who were saying, because he allowed and they were Ethiopian Jews. It shows you that, it's not really about being Jewish. It's about being a white Jewish settler. The way that they treat African refugees is absolutely shocking. There's basically a concentration camp at the end of the country that houses refugees, and they just get cycled out of Tel Aviv, and they're really only exploited for the labor force. So it's a crazy story.
Yeah, we're kind of losing connection with you guys, but we can take a couple more questions if y'all have it. Sure.
I was wondering, if you're talking to the American population, what would you tell them, and what do you think is a way to expand outreach so you can educate the American population about the problem and what they can do to change the approach of what the U.S. is doing to help Israel?
Well, I'm a media critic, and that's my career, and Mike and I are doing this show called The Empire Files because we really feel like the U.S. empire is such a huge purveyor of destabilization and violence across the rest of the world. And so we're trying to catalog kind of these stories and from the voices of the marginalized and oppressed, because the victors always write the narrative, right? And the winners write history. So we're trying to retell this history, and that's really primarily because the media is such a front of this war, that I really think that media perception and waking people up that way of what's really going on the ground is the number one priority that we should be doing and acting on. And if anyone, doesn't believe you, just show them the flotilla assault from Israeli military assaulting a bunch of peace activists on a boat in international waters who had nothing but forks and spoons to protect themselves, and completely assassinated on this boat from Israeli paramilitary soldiers launching onto it. And the way that the American media covered that shit was insane. They were circling the people on the boat saying, hitting soldiers with spoons and chairs. And it's like, yeah, they just saw someone get killed. Of course you're going to do everything you can to try to survive and protect yourself. And the media, that's when I woke up to how insane the media was. So that is when I channeled all of my efforts into correcting the narrative and really showing the American public, here's what your tax dollars are paying for. This is not something that you can be removed from. Sorry, I get really emotional.
Yeah, did you? I think share the question first, and then we'll go last. Yeah.
So with the recent re-election of Netanyahu, there was some news articles talking about how 50% of Israelis were, it was a very tight race. And I don't know, is that more media misrepresentation that you were talking about to kind of, rationalize this occupation? Or do you really think that Israelis are becoming more socially conscious and aware of what's going on, and maybe that could be, some change in the future? So.
Yeah. No, great question. The election wasn't tight because Netanyahu was too right-wing. It was tight because he's too left-wing. Netanyahu is considered in Israeli society to be a liberal. So there's no left in Israeli society. I mean, there is a small number of anti-Zionist activists. They are completely marginalized. There's an Israeli woman who went to jail, a poem sympathetic to Palestinians on Facebook. We talked to an Israeli anti-Zionist activist who, if people recognize her, mobs will start to attack her, and police have had to sweep her away. And they're trying to put her in jail for defacing the Israeli flag for 3 years. So those who are anti-Zionist in Israel, and it was different, was more of a left in Israeli society, is gone to the point where if you are, there's a saying in Israel, and it's the Arabs are a common cold, but leftists are AIDS. The common cold if you have AIDS, meaning that the leftists are the barrier to them expelling the Arabs, and worse than the Arabs in the country. And so that is, I think, mainstream Israeli thought. As Abby was mentioning, there's a new religious fundamentalist movement that's winning all these seats of power that was called the Temple Movement, which wants to, they just stormed Al-Aqsa Mosque the other day. They ever had. So it's more right-wing, more fanatical people are ascending in Israeli society, and those small numbers who are, left-leaning or liberals are completely marginalized, and those that are the left are not even anti-occupation and anti-Zionist. So it's a very grim outlook within Israeli society, and I would say it's not possible at all.
Yeah, there's a couple instances where you can just see this genocidal rhetoric coming from actual cabinet, Knesset ministers. The Minister of Education said that Palestinians are committing self-genocide. He actually said that, and I really don't think there's anywhere else in the whole world that you can look at people being genocided and say that they're committing it upon themselves. That's how fucking warped the situation is, where these people actually project that. She's the Justice Minister who said that we need to basically kill all Palestinian women because they give birth to little snakes. So this is the rhetoric coming out of actual Knesset members who are administering entire departments. So this is not an aberration. This is how mainstream thought is evolving within the country, and it is extremely disturbing.
And you have a question there? Yeah.
Well, first of all, I want to thank you for your honesty and your bravery. You may be banned from going to Israel again once they find out. And my question is, it's so frustrating, externally and internally, going in and out of Israel is just so frustrating because our hands are tied in so many ways. If something's put online or BDS, there's a consequence. If you're Palestinian and you using your voice, there's a consequence. If you're Israeli, there's a consequence. And it's, I'm wondering how long it'll be before Palestinian people are phased out of society. It's 70 years, and we're talking less than 20%. Those neighborhoods are completely surrounded by Israelis, so that there cannot be neighborhoods and communities, so they can't communicate. So what they're trying to do, there is another attempt again to shut them down. And it's such a big problem, the finances, the military money. If you follow the money, you can follow what's happening. And it's the military might in the United States, and with Netanyahu, the military might that he gets. And it seems almost impossible to be able to fight that. These organizations that are involved in BDS, you're correct. Now the governments have gotten involved, and you can be prosecuted in the United States, even at Berkeley, and they're trying to do that in Europe, England, and so forth. And so I just want to applaud you, because this is at least one thing that you are doing, one thing, and we all add to that some goodness. And I'm wondering this was recent that you were there, and I'm wondering, this was 4,000 women who marched this week, 4,000 Palestinian and Israeli women who marched for peace. And I'm wondering, even in that big organized event, if there was anything that became of that, if something will have changed as a result of that. I know that Ms. Gabawi was there from Liberia, and she was the main speaker, the Nobel Prize winner. But wow, if we are trying all these other things and we're not making even a dent, we can say we made a dent with BDS, but then Israel has come back against us.
I will say one thing that I want to move it over to you, but there are success stories happening all over the place. Like you mentioned in Berkeley, there was that class trying to teach the real history of colonization and occupation of Palestine. Of course, it was protested. It was briefly taken off, right, for a little bit because of this international backlash now, because of the solidarity among thousands, tens of thousands of Palestinian activists or pro-Palestinian activists around the world reinstated. And I think that really shows you that the pressure is so strong now that you can't do that anymore. You can't just erase what's going on. You can't hide it anymore, because we're going to be there exposing your asses no matter what. And this is just a small portion of it. Like you just said, I mean, we're just doing our part. The tide is turning, for sure. It is turning, and they are running scared because they know that that's all they have is the lies.
Yeah, there's important for everyone to be involved in this issue in some way. I mean, the resistance by the Palestinian people, their resistance is existing in Palestine. I mean, they stand up to the Israeli forces every day. They're dealing with settler attacks, military attacks. The outcome, they're fighting so that they can just stay in their home and stay in their village. So their day-to-day fight is just to be able to exist in the land that they're from. And holding on long enough for something to happen, it comes down to the fact that this is only possible because of U.S. sponsorship, flat out. I mean, if it wasn't for the billions of dollars in aid, military aid, backing of the U.S. empire letting this happen, government would not be able to do it. And so that's where we come in. I mean, that's the fight here in the United States against U.S. funding of the Israeli occupation, while the Palestinians are in Palestine fighting to be able to exist and live in their land, and the BDS movements around the world. Those are all the forces that are coming together, to change the situation, which is ending U.S. aid to Israel, I think, would make the biggest impact of all.
And it seems like other countries are so acutely aware of what's going on. You see huge mobilizations and mass movements whenever something like this happens, even with U.S. wars, right? It seems like Americans are the last to really know. We're constantly in the dark, putting our heads in the sand, and that's where we come in. I mean, people like you, going out and dispelling these myths, talking about really the Palestinians' right to self-determination. The fact that the UN even says their right to resist is legal, right, under illegal occupation. Learning the facts, and I didn't even know before, after we came back, I learned so much, and I was so emboldened with the truth, seeing it firsthand. But even then, I still didn't really understand the history of the stages on that map. And so we did our first episode really understanding how this happened, and just emboldening yourself with the truth, learning what's really going on, and however you can, talk to everyone that you hear. generalizes Palestinians or tries to paint them in a negative light, just say, hey, you know, that I heard this, or have you heard this? And just try to plant those seeds wherever you can, because we never know when those seeds will sprout.
Yeah, Val, you got it.
2 nights ago in Portland, Portland State University, just 2 hours north of us, the student senate there voted 24-2 to divest the university's funds from organizations, from corporations that are benefiting from the occupation, particularly Motorola, Hewlett-Packard, G4S, and Caterpillar. So I'm hoping that they're just the first university in Oregon, and that Oregon State University is the next one. And thank you for helping us spread the word on this campus, and it's really appreciated.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, such great news. Yeah, so many initiatives tonight.
It's not a question.
Okay.
Hi, my name is Rima, and I'm a Palestinian here in Corvallis for 15 years, and I have my husband and my daughter in here. My other 2 kids are back in Palestine. They're back and living there. I just really want to thank you for all what you do and the work that you put there, and I hope all this go all over the United States, and for people to understand who we are and the strength that we have, and we really resist, and we demand, and we determine to have our rights. I know it's been about 70 some years that we've been occupied. It's probably the longest occupation ever, but the Palestinians are different than any other nations. They are determined, and they're very strong. They have the strong will to keep going, and they do stand together. So thank you so much again, and I appreciate it. And I mean, thank you all for being here. Thanks a lot.
Thank you so much for that. It was so great.
And before we completely end it, sorry. Okay, so ASAP, we're a student organization, so we have no funds, we have no money. So Abby and Mike are taking time out of their like busy days. They run the show. So they're doing this just to bring awareness to us on the Palestinian struggle. So please help me thank.
Thank you for putting it on.
Thank you so
Every
much.
campus needs to be doing this.
Yeah, thank you so much, and we're happy to. And everyone, yeah, check out the Empire Files, and guys, it's really awesome to have you guys here and to get all the input. Thanks so much, Azim.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Bye, you guys.